Before we begin, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's dive in. The wind screamed across the golden dunes of northern Sudan, where the Nubian desert meets the Nile. 1,000 years ago, this was the seat of power for an empire ruled not by kings, but by queens. And not just any queens. They were Kandakes, warrior women, rulers of the ancient kingdom of Kush, and fierce defenders of African sovereignty. Today, little remains but sand-blown ruins and sun-scorched stone. But beneath the silence, echoes of their power linger, if you know where to look. At the foot of the Jebel Barkal mountain, a team of archaeologists uncovers a buried stele, its inscriptions worn but legible. A royal decree from Amanirenas, the most feared queen in Nubian history. She faced down the might of Rome itself, and won. But before we tell her story, we must understand the world she inherited, a land of pyramids, gods, and ancient fire. Long before Amanirenas, the Kushite kingdom had risen as a black African power south of Egypt. Its heart was Meroë, a city of iron forges, temples, and towering pyramids. Here, in a civilization that stretched across 1,200 kilometers, women could rule as supreme monarchs, a reality rare in the ancient world. Kandakes weren't queens in the European sense. They were kingmakers, commanders of armies, protectors of the god Amun. The Kushites believed divinity flowed through blood and soil, not through conquest. From the red granite quarries of the east to the cattle-rich plains of the White Nile, their power was absolute. But their greatest trial would come not from within, but from across the sea, from the Roman Empire, hungry for new lands and riches. To the west, smoke curled above the desert horizon. Roman legions, led by Gaius Petronius, marched across the dunes after securing Egypt. Rome believed Kush would fall just as easily, but they hadn't counted on the Kandake. The reigning queen, Amanirenas, was already watching. Blind in one eye from battle and draped in leopard skins, she rode with her son, Prince Akhinadad, to the northern frontier. Their scouts had seen the dust of the Romans rising like a storm. Beneath the surface, Amanirenas seethed, not only for her people, but for her late husband, killed by Roman expansionism. War was not just politics, it was vengeance, and in the morning she would unleash fury from the south. At dawn, the clash came at Qasr Ibrim, a fortress town on the edge of Roman-controlled Egypt. Petronius was confident until arrows rained down from the cliffs and Nubian cavalry emerged from the riverbanks in silence. Amanirenas led the charge, swinging her iron blade with precision. Her warriors fought not for empire, but for survival. The Romans had elephants, the Kushites had fury and knowledge of the land. By sunset, the Romans had fallen back, surprised and bloodied. Amanirenas didn't stop. She advanced further into Roman territory, sacking towns, burning symbols of foreign rule, and even capturing Roman statues, one of which she defaced in triumph, gouging out its eyes. Back in Rome, news of the rebellion stunned Emperor Augustus. A woman? A black African queen had humiliated his legions? He demanded retaliation. But Amanirenas wasn't done yet. She sent a peace delegation, not to plead, but to warn. Her message was clear. The Nile is our lifeblood, not Rome's. She offered terms not from fear, but from strength. Rome, reeling from other revolts and overstretched, eventually agreed. Amanirenas won peace on her terms. The Romans withdrew, never again attempting full conquest of Kush. The Kandake had drawn a line in the sand, and empires listened. But her story, like the kingdom she ruled, would one day be buried by time and sand, waiting to be uncovered. In the heart of Meroë, far from Roman eyes, the legacy of the Kandakes was forged in silence and steel. Beneath the smoke of iron furnaces and the chants of temple priests, young Khalima, niece of Amanirenas, was being trained not for courtly diplomacy, but for war. At just 16, she could split a spear with her bare hands, memorize coded battle formations, and ride a camel through desert storms. The elders saw in her the fire of the old queens, the defiance of Shanakdate, the wisdom of Amanishiketo. Kandakes were not born, they were made, through pain, ritual, and unbreakable will. As the drums echoed through the palace corridors, Khalima's coronation loomed. She was chosen, and she would not rule as a symbol, but as a sword. But fire attracts enemies. To the north, a Roman spy disguised as a merchant slipped into Meroë's markets. His orders? Destabilize the queen's bloodline, uncover military secrets, and assassinate Khalima before she could ascend. He watched from a distance as she trained with the palace guards, noting every weakness, every shadow she passed through. Yet he underestimated one thing: the power of Nubian loyalty. Khalima's bodyguard, Serwa, a talling woman scarred from past wars, sensed the outsider's unease. She had served Amanirenas. Now she would protect her heir. As the spy moved through the crowded alleyways of the lower city, Serwa followed with quiet steps and a blade hidden beneath her robes. That night, under a moonless sky, Khalima was taken to the Temple of the Lioness, dedicated to Sekhmet, the goddess of war and healing. It was tradition. Before any Kandake could rule, she must face the trial of fire. Inside the temple, surrounded by statues and flickering torches, Khalima walked barefoot across burning coals while reciting the oaths of her ancestors. Her voice did not tremble, neither did her steps. Outside, Serwa dragged the Roman spy before the high priestess. He begged for mercy. Instead, they branded him with the lion's mark and cast him into the desert, blindfolded and defeated. Meroë would not fall from within, not while the blood of Kandake still flowed. At dawn, the coronation began. Khalima stood on the sandstone steps of the temple, overlooking thousands gathered beneath the rising sun. Her robes shimmered with gold thread, her crown bore the vulture and sun disk. As the high priestess poured water from the Nile over her head, the people chanted her name. Drums thundered like heartbeats. She was now Kandake Khalima of Kush, sworn to protect the sacred river, the gods of her people, and the legacy of her aunt Amanirenas. From behind her, Serwa placed the ceremonial spear into her hand. With it, she raised her arm, and the crowd roared. A queen had risen. But beyond the dunes, foreign armies were gathering again. That same evening, a shadow rode swiftly from the north. A horseman arrived at the gates of Meroë with dust-streaked skin and eyes wide from terror. He collapsed before the guards, gasping one word: Rome. Khalima turned to the horizon, her grip on the spear tightening. The peace her aunt had won was crumbling. This time, the Romans weren't just retaliating, they were bringing siege weapons and war elephants. A storm was coming. But Khalima didn't flinch. She had faced fire, she had earned blood, and now she would lead her people into the storm.
Before the story continues, don't forget to drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's dive in. The Nile no longer whispered peace. It churned under a blood-red sky as Kandake Khalima stood before her war council in the great sandstone hall. The room was quiet. Every general, priest, and elder watched her. News had arrived. A Roman battalion, nearly 1,000 strong, had crossed into Nubian territory, backed by siege towers, war elephants, and hired mercenaries. They were aiming for Pachoras, the sacred fortress by the river's bend. Khalima looked over the ancient maps etched into the stone floor. Her hand hovered over the city's name, like a mother shielding a child. She turned to her generals and said one word: burn. If Rome wanted war, she would give them the wrath of a queen. The desert air turned thick with tension as Khalima led her army across the dunes. Her forces moved like shadows, silent, swift, and merciless. Women warriors painted their faces in red ochre and ash, whispering prayers to the lioness goddess. Archers rode camels. Blacksmiths walked with war hammers slung across their backs. They were no ordinary army. They were defenders of a bloodline. As they approached the outskirts of Pachoris, smoke rose in the distance. The Romans had arrived first. Khalima gritted her teeth. She would not let history repeat itself. The Kandakes had beaten Rome before, and she would do it again. That night, beneath the sky of stars and silence, Khalima launched her attack. Her strategy was not brute force, it was precision. First, her archers fired flaming arrows from the cliffs, setting Roman tents ablaze. Then, camel riders swooped in from both sides, sowing chaos. Finally, Khalima and Serwa led the charge through the main gate, shattering the Roman front line. The clash of steel echoed across the hills. Khalima fought like a lioness, shield raised, spear spinning, cloak soaked in sweat and blood. One Roman captain lunged at her with a gladius. She caught his blade with her gauntlet, twisted his arm, and drove her dagger into his throat. The Battle of Pachoris had begun, and it would end with fire. By dawn, the battlefield lay silent. Roman bodies littered the sand like broken statues. The Nile lapped red at its shores. Khalima stood over the fallen Roman standard, gripping it in her hand. Her warriors surrounded her, bloodied but triumphant. The price had been high, but Pachoris stood. She turned to Serwa and whispered, "We must strike before they return." The victory had bought time, but not peace. Rome would not forget this humiliation. And deep within the desert, Khalima began planning her boldest move yet, to take the war across the Nile and strike Rome's southern outposts. It was madness, but so was every act of revolution. But even queens bleed. As Khalima walked through the camp that evening, her hand brushed her ribs. Warm blood soaked her side. A Roman blade had found her, shallow but deep enough to slow her. She refused to show weakness. She entered the healer's tent alone. Inside, the old priestess Meroë cleaned her wound with Nile herbs and whispered ancient incantations. "You are fire, but even fire must rest before it burns again." Khalima nodded but said nothing. Outside, her army celebrated. Inside, she stared at the flickering candlelight, wondering if she could survive what was coming next. The Romans would not stop, and neither would she. Before the story continues, don't forget to drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. Let's dive in. 2 moons had passed since the Battle of Pachoris, and Rome was reeling. Across the Nile, Roman commanders debated whether to retaliate or retreat, but Khalima had already made the choice for them. Her scouts had uncovered a key Roman supply route, a secret desert corridor near the ruins of Peramenum, guarded only by a minor garrison. If they could strike it, they could starve the Roman outposts along the southern frontier. It was bold, risky, but Nubian history had always been carved by queens who took the impossible and turned it into triumph. As Khalima stood before her troops in the shadow of the Peramenum cliffs, she gave no speech. She only raised her spear, and they followed. The plan was executed with ghost-like precision. At sunset, Khalima's spies, disguised as salt traders, approached the Roman camp with donkeys and humble cloaks. Inside their baskets, snakes, scorpions, and fire dust, potent Nubian alchemical weapons. As the Romans opened the gates, chaos erupted. The venomous creatures were released, torches ignited hidden powder, and the night sky exploded in flame. Then, from the cliffs above, Nubian warriors descended like falcons, screaming war chants into the firestorm. The Roman soldiers had no time to form ranks. By the time the dust settled, the supply depot was ash, and not a single Nubian was left behind. Word of the daring ambush spread like wildfire. Rome retaliated hard. A larger legion was sent south, not to reclaim territory, but to kill Khalima. They branded her a savage queen, a desert witch, an enemy of civilization. But Khalima wore those names like armor. She retreated into the eastern canyons of Kusum, where the land itself twisted like a maze. Serwa warned her, "We're outnumbered. Even your fire cannot burn an entire storm." She simply replied, "Then let the storm come to me." With clever traps and ambushes set among the cliffs, she turned the canyons into a living labyrinth. And when the Romans entered, the desert itself swallowed them. What followed was not a battle, it was a massacre. One by one, Roman scouts disappeared. Supply wagons burst into flames. War horses fled into the rocks, panicked by Nubian war drums. When the main force finally entered the canyon center, a sandstorm descended, unnatural, summoned by gods or by fate. Blinded and disoriented, the Romans stumbled into death traps. Spikes beneath sand, collapsing ledges, poisoned wells. Khalima moved among them like a ghost. Her warriors struck from the fog, then vanished again. By dawn, only a handful of Romans remained. Those who fled told tales not of a queen, but of a myth, a goddess made of fire and vengeance. When Khalima returned to Napata, the city wept, not in sorrow, but in awe. She had not only defended the kingdom, she had expanded its power deeper into Roman territory. A victory monument was carved into the Temple of Amun, a towering image of a lion-headed queen standing over fallen Roman shields. But Khalima didn't stay for the ceremonies. She stood at the edge of the temple beside Serwa, watching the sun bleed over the desert. "I dreamed of a Nubia that feared no empire," she said. Serwa replied, "You didn't dream it, you lived it." Still, in Khalima's eyes, the war wasn't over. Rome would return. But now, the world knew, Nubia would never bow. Years passed, and the empire of Nubia flourished beneath Khalima's shadow. Trade routes reopened. Scholars from Egypt came south to learn from Nubian astronomers. The temples sang with drum beats of peace, but even peace cannot silence time. Khalima, now older, scarred, and slower in step, still walked the city of Meroë every morning, not as a queen on a throne, but as a soldier among her people. The children called her Mother of the Lions. She smiled, though her eyes had dimmed. One evening, Serwa found her at the edge of the Nile, alone, gazing across the river toward the fading ruins of Roman forts. "Will they come again?" she asked. Khalima replied, "They always do, but now they'll find a nation ready." One night, a messenger arrived from the northern frontier. Roman ships had returned, this time with envoys, not soldiers. They came not to conquer, but to negotiate. The queen's legend had done what no war ever could, humble an empire. The Roman general, now grayed and weary, stood before Khalima at the palace gates. "You fight like a goddess," he said. She answered, "Then treat my people as divine." The terms were clear. Nubia would remain sovereign, its temples untouched, its borders honored. When the treaty was signed, Khalima made no grand speech. She only looked to Serwa and whispered, "We have outlived them."
Peace, true peace, finally settled over Nubia, and with it came stories, legends whispered under moonlight, painted on temple walls, etched in silver scripts. Girls trained in sword and diplomacy. The Lion Guard grew into an elite institution of scholar warriors, and Serwa,
now a general herself, often found young warriors kneeling at Khalima's feet, asking how to fight like her. Khalima would laugh and say, "Fight with your heart, win with your fire." But quietly, her health waned. One morning, she did not rise. The kingdom held its breath. The woman who had defied an empire, who had ridden storms and burned borders, was gone. But she had not died. She had become eternal. The funeral lasted 7 days. Women from across Africa came to honor her. Queens from Kush, warrior priestesses from Aksum, desert traders from Libya. No one wept, not out of denial, but defiance. They sang instead, songs of the Queen of Storms, the Lioness of the Sands, the Sun-bearer. Her sarcophagus was carved with her story, not her lineage. Her final resting place? Beneath the tallest pyramid in Meroë, facing the rising sun. Surwa led the last procession and placed Khalima's spear in her tomb. "You carried the sun for us," she whispered. "Now let it rise for you." And so it did. And so the tale of Khalima, the warrior queen who bent time and empire, became more than history. It became prophecy. A tale told in fire and sand, in steel and silence. Today, the winds of Nubia still whisper her name through the canyons. They say that when justice is threatened and courage is needed most, her spirit rides again in the hearts of women who refuse to kneel. The queens of the desert never left. They merely wait, like the storm, for the right moment to rise.